The letter arrived 30 years late. No return address, no name. Just 4 words written in a hand I buried decades ago. I forgive you, Mom. And in that moment, every lie I told myself about his death fell apart.
Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and tell me where you're listening from. It helps us keep sharing stories. Do me a small kindness, thanks.
The letter wasn't supposed to find me, not after 30 years. It arrived on a Tuesday with the rest of the junk: coupon books, a church flyer, a notice about gutter cleaning, except this one had my name written in a hand I hadn't seen since the week we buried him. There was no return address, just a faint postmark that looked smudged by time and weather. I almost tossed it with the pizza ads. Then I saw the date stamped in the corner, the ink ghosted but unmistakable: April 1994. I stood at the sink with the envelope and the kind of tremor that doesn't belong to hands so much as to old decisions. The kettle started its soft hiss on the stove. I turned it off. A person can only stand so many noises at once. I slid a butter knife under the glued edge and felt the papery crack give way, and for a moment I was 35 again, arguing with a boy who had his father's shoulders and my mother's stubbornness. The flap lifted. Inside was a single photograph and a sheet of paper no larger than a grocery list. The photograph was his school picture, the one from the year his hair wouldn't part no matter how hard I tried with a wet comb. He had a half smile that fought with a secret he wouldn't tell me. The paper behind it held only 4 words, written in block letters that looked like he'd practiced first, then pressed too hard. I forgive you, Mom. I sat down. It wasn't the kind of sitting you do when you're tired. It was the kind you do when your knees forget the bargain they made with the floor. I put the picture flat on the tablecloth, blue checks, faded in the places where life had leaned too often, and I stared until my eyes stung and the room took on that thinness it gets just before a storm. Forgiveness is a door you look at for years and pretend isn't there. You learn how to set the table around it, vacuum around it, invite people over and laugh too loud so no one asks why you never open it. I had lived 3 decades with that door closed. Now a letter from 1994 had turned the knob a little. I told myself it was a prank. I told myself it was a mistake. I told myself a good, solid lie, that this was just the postal service cleaning out some back room and delivering old, dead things to people who would take them quietly and throw them away. That would have been easier than the alternative, easier than wondering why my son's forgivings were still making their way to me when he had not. When he left, the house did not become empty all at once. It was the kind of emptiness that sneaks up in chores: an extra fork in the drawer, a hoodie draped over a chair that no one will claim, the dent in the couch cushion that tries not to look like a shrine. The night he didn't come home, the phone rang like a judge. A fisherman had seen taillights go down the grade near Miller's Creek. A week later, they found the car in water the color of pennies. The coroner spoke softly, the way a man does when he stands between a mother and the facts. The service was small. I shook too many hands. I learned there aren't enough casseroles in the world to keep a person from starving in the middle of a crowded room. Years do not heal so much as teach, and mostly what they teach is choreography. You learn when to nod, when to smile, when to say, "I'm fine," and how to change the subject with the grace of a pickpocket. Some days you almost believe yourself. Some days the kettle whistle sounds like a siren, and you turn the stove off with both hands like you're putting out a fire. I turned the photo over, maybe because people in grief do foolish things and call it proof. On the back was pencil under the ink, like someone had written lightly and then decided to go darker. I tilted the paper toward the window. The light caught the dents. The dents caught another sentence. If this ever reaches you, it means I made it out. What does a sentence like that do to a woman who buried a car? It doesn't ring a bell, it rings every bell. I stood up so fast the chair legs scraped, and I had to hold the counter to stop the room from sliding. Make it out of what? Out of the creek, out of town, out of me. I called the post office. The man on the line sounded tired in the way bureaucrats do after lunch. "Ma'am," he said, "we're clearing an old distribution space. A pallet must have been me-sorted back then. Sometimes the system spits out the past. I'm sorry if it's brought up, well, things." He waited, like the quiet might say something sane in my ear. "We're seeing odd dates this week. 30 years isn't unheard of." 30 years isn't unheard of. The phrase landed with the gentle insult of truth. I thanked him. I didn't know what else to do with a sentence like that. If you live long enough, you learn to keep certain roads off your errands. I had done a good job of avoiding the turnoff to Miller's Creek. The guardrail there rusted like a bruise, and the mile marker leaned as if even numbers get tired. That afternoon, I drove it anyway, because something in me refused to be the kind of woman who waits for answers to knock on her door dressed as letters. The tires hummed the old song. The sky was a workman's gray. A breeze worried the cattails the way fingers worry a rosary. I parked in the same turnout where men park to eat sandwiches in peace. The water below moved like slow, deliberate breath. I stood at the top of the grade for a long minute, listening the way a mother listens to a closed door, half for voices, half for miracles. When I finally walked down, the gravel scuffed under my shoes, and I thought, this is the sound of a faith I don't deserve. A man was fishing there. He wore a heavy coat and the kind of hat men wear when they've learned their scalp has its own opinions. He turned at the noise of my approach, and whatever was left of my poise untied itself. It wasn't his face. 30 years will change a face. It was the way his eyes took the inventory of me, patient, careful, searching for something he hoped was still there. Children look at you like you are an answer. Grown men look at you like maybe you still have the question. I'm not trespassing, I said, because manners are a way to keep from weeping. I won't bother you. Everyone bothers the creek, he said, and there was a smile in it, small, self-defense more than joy. He watched my hands. People do when they wonder if you're going to drop something important. Then he nodded at the envelope I didn't realize I'd been gripping. You got it, he said softly. Didn't think it would ever get where it was going. I felt all the words I'd practiced choking each other at the gate. There are things you plan to say if the dead ever stand up. None of them survived the standing. I buried a car, I said finally. They told me it was done. Cars are very poor witnesses, he said. He set the pole aside with a care that looked ceremonial. I didn't come up for a long time. Cold will negotiate with a man. It will take a price and give him back small. I crawled out further down. Someone carried me to a clinic that didn't ask questions. I learned a new name for a while. Sometimes men do that and no one's to blame, and sometimes men do that and blame runs behind them like dogs. You could have come home, I said, and even I heard the accusation I had promised God I wouldn't use. Not then, he answered. You said things that night. I did too. I thought if I showed up at the door, you would finish the conversation we started. I was a boy. I didn't understand how silence can be its own ruin. He looked at my face the way carpenters look at wood grain, measuring what it might carry. I did right, he went on. Back when the doctor said you were sick, I sent a letter to the old address. I waited a month at the post office in the other town for it to come back. It didn't. So I figured it found you, and you were done with me. I never saw it, I said, until today. We stood in the kind of quiet that older folks don't fear anymore. When you're young, silence is insult. When you're old, it's a chair. He put his hands in his pockets and took them out as if any gesture might look like apology and he hadn't earned that yet. He nodded at the creek. It keeps its word, he said. Always moves, never forgets. The rest of us stumble and call it progress. You wrote that you forgive me, I said. That's not a word a boy writes lightly. I wrote it first in pencil, he answered. I didn't know if I meant it. Then I taught myself to mean it. Then I went over it in ink. I figured if I ever saw my own handwriting in a stranger's kitchen 30 years later, I'd want the words to be clear. For a moment, the work of breathing felt like writing with the wrong hand. Forgiveness is a choice you make because the alternative is a kind of permanent weather. I had been living under a drizzle for decades. He watched me the way men watch fires they built from damp wood. Hopeful, cautious, ready to add air. You have a family, I said, not because I knew, but because life has patterns and we all become them. I do, he said. A wife who thinks I was born at 20. 2 kids who know how to change a tire and say thank you to waitresses. I almost came to find you after my first child. There are hungers you can't explain until you hold a tiny person and realize you don't belong to yourself anymore. But I chose the life I had made. I told myself I was being merciful. Maybe I was being a coward. If you came to my door then, I said, I would have ruined that life with my arms. I would have begged until you hated me for it. Sometimes mercy and cowardice wear the same coat. He laughed then, not the bright laugh of a happy man, the tired one of a man who recognizes family in what hurts. He wiped at his eye like something blown there by the wind. Do you want to sit? He asked. I've got a camp chair in the truck that's seen better backs. I'll stand, I said. It feels like if I sit, the ground will make decisions for me. We talked the way old bridges creak, carefully, testing each plank. He told me what the years had done with him. The construction jobs, the summer his hand met a saw and lost the argument, the church he avoided, the one he later sat in for the sake of his daughter's choir. He did not say my name at first, and then when he did, he said it like a man laying a tool back where it belongs. I told him about my husband, who had died as if death were just one more chore the day had asked him to handle. About the garden I planted and killed and planted again, as if tomatoes could barter with sorrow. About the dog I let sleep on the couch because no one was there to say it was a bad habit. I told him the truth that lives under the prettier truths, that I had loved him like a wall, not a home. That I mistook rules for love, because rules stay put, and love will walk out in a storm to prove you wrong. I know, he said. I lived long enough to have a teenager, remember? I heard my own voice coming out of my mouth one night and knew I owed you an apology a generation too late. I would have accepted it, I said, and then I would have argued anyway. That was our sport. A hawk wrote a slow sentence across the sky. Somewhere behind us, a truck downshifted, and the sound rolled through the hollows like a memory clearing its throat. He lifted the fishing pole and reeled in nothing with the quiet dignity of a man who never minded the lack. I don't know what happens next, he said. I didn't come here expecting to be forgiven back. Maybe nothing happens, I said. Maybe this is it. Two people who once ripped each other open standing by a creek that has seen worse and learned not to gossip. I looked at his hands. They were not the hands I had held. They were the hands that had done their share of holding. Or maybe you call me on Sundays and we talk about weather until we can talk about other things. Maybe you let me know when your daughter sings. Maybe you send me the grocery list you pretend you don't need help writing. Maybe we settle for the humble mercy of hearing each other breathe on purpose. He blinked the way men do when the air gets too honest. I can do Sundays, he said. I can do bad jokes about the price of eggs. I can do the thing where you tell me to put on a coat even though we're not in the same zip code. He looked down at the water and then up into the years between us. I can do the rest slow. Slow is all I have left, I said. It used to feel like punishment. Lately, it feels like the only speed that tells the truth. We walked back to the turnout together, not touching, not avoiding it. The ground didn't make decisions for me after all. The truck door creaked like a secret unlearning how to hide. He opened the passenger side and took out a paper sack, the kind that used to hold bologna sandwiches at baseball games. He handed me a thermos cup full of coffee that tasted like it had been waiting for the right conversation. "Do you want to see the place where I came out?" he asked after a while. "It's not far. It's ugly in a kind way, like a scar that did its job." "Not today," I said. "Today I'd rather believe in the miracle than take a tour of its plumbing." He laughed again a little freer. "Fair enough." "Write your number inside," I said. I slid the envelope toward him like a referee sliding a coin. He took a pen from his coat, a stub of blue that had probably signed more receipts than declarations, and he wrote carefully, as though numbers could misbehave if you weren't stern with them. He handed it back. I put it in my purse with the photo and the forgiveness and all the other thin, sharp things a person carries. "Do you want the picture?" I asked. He shook his head. "It belongs where it's been. I have new ones, the kind a man earns when he sticks around." We stood at the edge of leaving and looked like people do when they're not sure how to do it without disrespecting the moment. He solved it the way he must have learned to solve other things, by keeping it small. He touched my sleeve, the lightest acknowledgement of existence. "I'll call Sunday," he said. "If you don't pick up, I'll be exactly as patient as you need." "I'll pick up," I said, "even if I pretend I forgot my glasses for a second to hear you say hello twice." He nodded. Then he climbed into the truck and started the engine like a man waking a dog. He drove off without the drama we practice in our heads. The gravel settled. The cattails bowed and stood back up, unoffended. Somewhere downstream, water worked on an old story with the same stubborn kindness it gives every stone. When I got home, I didn't put the envelope in a drawer. Drawers are where you put things you're scared to feel twice. I put it on the refrigerator with a magnet shaped like a tomato, and I made tea the way my mother did when the world needed to be reminded it was small. I sat at the table, and the house did its little noises. Settling wood, a clock tripping over its own minutes, the refrigerator humming like an old friend who doesn't ask for much, and I let the picture look at me from the counter while the kettle finished what it had started earlier. The phone rang around dinner time. It was not him. It was a woman from church needing desserts for a fundraiser. I said yes without the usual script about checking my calendar, because some days you want to say yes to anything that looks like living. After we hung up, I took out flour and sugar and the recipe card with butter stains that mark the places your heart leaned harder. I mixed and stirred and scraped the bowl like a person who believes in outcomes again. I slept that night, not the kind of sleep I've known for years, trimmed at the edges by anxious scissors. The kind you fall into like a quilt you didn't realize someone had been sewing for you with scraps of mercy. I dreamed the ordinary dream of walking down a sidewalk with no destination and liking the way the cracks made their map. On Sunday, the phone rang, and I let it ring once to prove I had mastered the art of not pouncing. Then I answered and said his name on purpose, and he said mine like we were both finalizing something we'd been drafting for 3 decades. We talked about the weather just as predicted. He told me a joke that didn't deserve the laugh I gave it and got it anyway. I told him to wear a coat. He told me he already had one on and it was too warm. We arranged a day where maybe I would meet the people who call him Dad, and maybe I would bring the casserole that wins children over when apologies have not practiced their manners yet. After the call, I went to the refrigerator and moved the magnet so it held the photo at the top edge. I wrote the date beneath it in pencil first, then in ink. I have learned my lessons about when to commit. I stood there until the tea went cold again and didn't mind. Cold gets a bad reputation. It keeps things. It kept a boy alive. It kept a letter safe behind bureaucracy and dust and whatever angels are assigned to the dullest tasks. It kept forgiveness from evaporating until both of us could learn to mean it. I do not know what the world calls this kind of ending. It doesn't glow. It doesn't play music. It doesn't ask the neighbors to look out their windows and clap. It is simpler and more demanding. It is 2 people who were once a disaster deciding to show up on time for the rest of the days they get. It is a woman who had become a museum of old noise learning to host quiet that doesn't accuse her. It is a man who died in one town and lived in another remembering. He does not have to choose between names if he tells the truth with both of them. If you have ever waited at a window for someone who was supposed to be gone, I hope a letter finds you. Maybe it won't wear ink and stamps. Maybe it will be a phone call or a knock or a stranger handing you a thermos in a parking lot and saying the one sentence you've been starving to hear, "I forgive you." Or maybe it will be you, writing the letter first in pencil and then in ink, and sending it to yourself across the years so that when it finally arrives, you can open it with both hands and say out loud, in a quiet kitchen, to no one and to everyone, "I made it out." If this reached a tender place in you, pass it along. Tell me where you're listening from. Sometimes, the smallest share is the only bridge a letter needs to cross. Thank you for giving this one a place to land, and God willing, I'll meet you back here for the next story.